Genius Hour Project. Deer Processing by Dalton Stike. A Stike Boys production. Brought to you in part by Rednecks with Guns. If it's brown, it's down. Yee yee! Warning. Viewer discretion is advised. This video depicts blood, guts, and dead animals, along with the process it takes to prepare them for human consumption. Oh, and the editing is not Hollywood quality. I warned you. Stike Boys Incorporated and Hardenbrook's class are not responsible for loss of appetite, eyesight, or stomach content. Enjoy. Opening day of rifle season 2016, I shot and killed a 2-point buck early in the morning. This was the first time that I had gut a deer by myself. I began by spreading the deer open and pulling some skin and making a cut on each leg on the inside. I cut almost all the way down until I got to the genitals of the deer. This would open up room for me to use a pull and slice method to cut the hide away so I could get into the lining of the stomach and pull the guts out of the deer. I go all the way up to the top of the chest, opening up area, and you can see the stomach and the actual body itself of the deer here. I will then use my gut hook to hook the inside of the deer and cut it open so I can get the guts out. I shot this deer in its stomach. Here I really open up the deer and part of the stomach contents begin to come out. They're all busted up from the bullet and in lots of little pieces. Once the stomach is opened up, I have to cut all the way through the breastplate of the deer. That way I can get to the esophagus and the heart and lungs to extract the rest of the guts. It takes me a while to cut through this breastplate because my knife is not very large and extremely dull, but eventually I get it. I opened the chest all the way up, that way I could get to the esophagus to cut it off and pull it out. Here you can see the esophagus, the heart, and the lungs. After the esophagus is cut, I grab onto it and begin to pull everything out of the deer. Everything is interconnected, so it doesn't take much to rip the guts out, but there is some lining, like stomach linings, that are dividing the guts from touching. Here you see me pulling out the heart and lungs by the esophagus. and soon I cut everything out. The majority of the guts come out all in one piece after cutting the small dividers. There's only a little bit left inside, along with all of the blood and stomach contents that were spilled out into the deer after I shot it. Wasn't much left to do except for scrape out the rest of the blood and everything that's inside the deer. Once this is all scraped out, I go to remove the anus and genitals from the deer along with the bladder so the deer meat does not get ruined by urine or fecal matter. Here I'm beginning to remove the genitals and the anus of the deer along with the bladder. I won't go into details, but I followed the original cuts that I made the whole way down and end up cutting around the anus in order to remove it. Once the genitals and the anus and the bladder are removed, then I pull the deer to the side, scrape it out as best I can, then we throw it in the truck and take it home so we can begin to skin it. I got the deer home, strung it up on the gable, washed it out with a hose, and I started skinning. I cut all the way up as high as I could on the deer above the legs, that way I could get the most meat out. I didn't cut all the way into the meat, but I cut through the hide. That way we can start to peel the skin away and cut. On each leg, there's a whole circle around, and then we're going to cut all the way through to the exposed part of the inside of the deer. So once I cut down on the inside of the deer leg, I do sort of the same thing that I did just getting through earlier on the stomach. Kind of just peel away the hide, and there's like a little film of fat that's connecting the meat to the hide. Just pull it and slice it. Uh, you can see it here. That's pretty much the whole deer process. So we're going to speed it up a little bit until we get to certain areas that are different. But I'm just pulling and peeling that white, and the inside of the hide is pretty much all white except for all the bloody area that's there before. Do that on both legs, and at certain areas you can also just pull the skin and the hide and it'll come right off. Once I got down both back legs, we come to the tail. Now, the tail can be difficult and it can be easy. It depends on just how the deer is. Pretty much what I had to do is I took the skin and you pull as hard as you can because there is some tender meat in the tail. So you just pull and yank the skin back all the way down as far down the tail as I could, and then I can either snap the tail or you can cut it with a or I can cut it with a bone saw. I'm not quite sure which one I did, but you see here that I'm pulling the hide away from the meat, and it's a lot quicker than having to cut. And I pull as far down the tail as I can before I have to actually cut around it and then cut the tail off. So here I made room for the tail, and I'm just pulling down as far as I can and getting as much of the meat exposed as possible at the tail because, like I said before, that is really good tender meat. And then I'm cutting it off right here, and I end up snapping it, but I didn't take the tail meat to the butcher. I just cut that off camera at a different time for just like some stew meat or a quick fry up. Once the tail's off, pretty much just pulling the rest of the hide down using the same method of the pull and the slice of the hide away from the deer. All that bloody stuff you see on the sides there, I'm cutting most of that off because it's unusable. That's really just what happens when you kill the deer. There's a lot of stuff. Sometimes there's stuff that just gets to be unusable. Uh, then just pulling and slicing all the way down till I get to the legs, and I do the exact same thing with the bottom legs that I did with the top legs, cutting the whole circle around, and on the inside, cutting away in. It's just a little bit more difficult with front legs because the shoulders there are difficult to get around. Once I got down to the front legs, we cut the camera off and raised the deer up. And this clip is just basically the whole thing getting around the shoulders. It's really difficult with the front legs. You have to push and pull and move the deer a lot. And then once both legs are done, takes me a little bit. But then we start getting to the head and the neck. The neck meat is another area that has some really nice tender meat, so I try and pull that down as far as I can before I begin to work on the head. So I got around the front shoulders, and right now I'm really just trying to pull as much of the hide down as I possibly can to get as much of the neck meat. I end up having to cut the hide, that way I can make it shorter and easier for me to work with. Uh, Cutting all the way down to his throat, cutting the hide off, that way it's easier to grab and pull before I end up having to cut the head off here in a minute. We've almost reached the very end. Here, I cut the hide off, then I pull as much of the meat down and much of the hide down as I possibly can, and using a sharp knife or a bone saw, I have to cut the meat there, and then I have to get through the bone in order to get the head off so I can send the deer to the butcher. Once I'm through all of the meat, I use the bone saw to cut the bone off of the deer's head. That way I can detach the head and get ready to get sent over to the butchers. Just cut that final little slice there, and off comes the head. Now there are many things you can do with the head, but that was not a trophy deer, so we end up just putting it uh, over on the farm and letting the coyotes and the wildlife handle it. There's the finished product of the deer. After I rinse it out one more time, take it to the butcher where they cut the meat out that I want, make deer burger, deer steaks, and all that, and then they send it back to me. Thank you for watching. Please enjoy a sample of that deer that I made as a roast over the course of last night. Sorry, PETA. Deer's just delicious. Thank you.